Hello everyone, I'm DonTheCrown, and today we're going to be going over the Diablo IV Druid class. This is a class with a lot of depth and a lot of interconnectivity. When I first was checking this out, I wasn't really all that impressed at first, but as I was reading through the aspects and some of the unique powers, it kind of became apparent how complex everything is going to be and how different skills are really designed to interact with other skills, and there's all sorts of synergy that is going on like crazy in the Druid, and so I'm getting pretty excited about this. We're going to be going over the datamined skills, the datamined legendary aspects that are both on the Codex of Power and on drop-only items, and we're going to be going over the Spirit Boons system, which is kind of the Druid-specific special system that only they have access to. And I will also talk a little bit about the legendary Paragon board stuff. To start off, Druids basically have, I would say, two different overall archetypes for skills themselves. And these are shape-shifting skills and nature skills. Shape-shifting skills are either going to be Werebear or Werewolf. And then for the nature skills, it seems to be Storm and Earth. Now, don't worry, there are still companion skills for the Druid. You'll be able to summon up some wolves or some crows or even a sneaky vine. But for the most part, most of the skills are going to fall into these two categories, shapeshifting or nature skills. And the capstone itself, the different passives that you have access to, really kind of help highlight this particular setup. And you might notice that right away that there are 6 different capstones options, whereas the Necromancer only had 4. You'll be able to pick 1 out of these 6 for your Druid. And for every single class, you're only able to select 1 capstone passive to kind of like round out or finish your build, if that makes any sense. So starting off, the Perfect Storm passive makes it so that your storm skills grant 2 spirit, which is what we consume to cast some of our skills, and deal 20% increased damage when damaging a vulnerable, immobilized, or slowed enemy. You'll note that the Druid has a ton of skills and other things that benefit from hitting enemies that are under certain types of crowd control. On the other side over here, we have Earthen Might, which is the very first lucky hit thing that actually has me pretty excited to try to break and abuse. And that is damaging enemies with earth skills has up to a 5% chance to restore all of your spirit and cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 10 seconds. This chance is increased by 10% for critical strikes and 100% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And so to me, that seems pretty cool, because most of the time we see lucky hit stuff, that means it's going to be multiplied against another skill's lucky hit chance. So if it has like a 50% lucky hit chance, like a lot of skills have something like that, it's going to be drastically reduced. So that 5% is like 2.5% or something. But if you can take that up to 100%, that means that this is going to proc off quite a bit, which is pretty exciting. Nothing like guaranteeing crits like almost permanently, maybe with maybe unlimited spirit against bosses. That sounds pretty fun. Now, between these two nodes, we have something that is basically the combination of focusing on either Storm or Earth. So this is Nature's Fury. So when you cast an Earth skill, you have a 20% chance to trigger a free Storm skill of the same category. In addition, when you cast a Storm skill, you have a 20% chance to trigger a free Earth skill, the same category. So this type of setup here really benefits from you not just focusing on Storm or not just focusing on Earth, but instead focusing kind of on both and having kind of like a build where you're doing a little bit of both. And I think that this is pretty neat indeed. On the other side is the shape-shifting side. So we have Ursine Strength, which grants us 20% additional max life while we're in Werebear form, and for 3 seconds after leaving Werebear form. For what I can tell, when you use any sort of shape-shifting skill, you'll shape-shift into that form, and you will remain in that form until you use some other skill that is not of that form. So if you continue to use Werebear skills over and over again, you'll just stay as a Werebear. If you're in Werebear and you use a Werewolf skill, you'll smoothly and cleanly transition into Werewolf's form. And if you use a human skill, you'll shift right out, all clean, no seemingly long animations, but we'll have to see this weekend how it actually looks. For the werewolf side, every 6th werewolf skill will be guaranteed to crit and deals 60% increased damage. At the front of it, this doesn't actually look all that impressive, but if you have the ability to, I don't know, do some sort of rotation where you're guaranteeing yourself to do a ton of damage with this, I could see that being very powerful. In the middle, we have Bestial Rampage, which after being a werewolf for 2.5 seconds, you gain 20% increased attack speed for 15 seconds. And after being a werebear for 2.5 seconds, you gain 20% increased damage for 15 seconds. So this is very obviously going to be benefiting people who are wanting to be both werebears and werewolves and shifting back and forth between the two and staying in form for at least 2.5 seconds each time, which I think is pretty cool to kind of have managed shifting. Now, next, I want to talk about the Spirit Boons section, and then we'll go through the skills, and then lastly, we'll go through the legendaries and uniques. But the Spirit Boons section part is something that we're not actually going to get to experience in the beta. The reason for this is because the Druids, like as a people, live in Skazglen, which is the section that is north of the area of the map that we can currently access. And we have to go up there, and we got to talk to them and do some work for them to get access to this system, and also to basically unlock parts of it. The way that it works is that you'll be able to get item drops that allow you to unlock different boons from different types of animals. And each little section here, like deer, eagle, snake, wolf, all have different things that you can pick. And you can pick one of these per horizontal section. So I can pick like prickle skin or gift of the stag, but I can't pick both of these. And then once you've unlocked every single spirit boon, you'll be able to specialize in one of them, like deer, for example, and you'll be able to pick 2 options as opposed to just one. And let's just go through these spirit boons now. Reminder, this is not something you're going to get to test out in the beta, but hopefully we'll be able to test it out maybe sometime before launch. So gaining thorns as a druid here. Now, one thing I want to note is that Druid is surprisingly not thorny at all. He has this, I believe, as his source of thorns. That's it. There's no thorns build, it appears, for the Druid. I was really surprised. I totally expected Druids of all the classes to be somewhat thorny, but apparently not. Gift of the Stag gives you 10 maximum spirit, which is your primary resource. Wariness reduces the damage you take from elites. And then Advantageous Beast gives you crowd control reduction on yourself. And so like wariness, I think here will probably be a very popular option to take less damage from some of the tougher mobs. For the Eagle section, we have Scythe Talons, which gives you flat critical strike chance, which I think is pretty good. Iron Feather can give you 10% maximum health. Swooping Attacks gives you 10% attack speed. And then Avian Wrath gives you critical strike damage. I can really see all of these different boons to be potentially pretty popular, and it'll be interesting to see what people do with this particular section. For Snake, we have Obsidian Slam, which makes it so that after X number of kills, your next Earth skill will be guaranteed to overpower, which is, I guess, okay, maybe. Overload makes it so that you have a lucky hit, where dealing lightning damage has a 20% chance to cause the target to emit a static discharge, dealing 60% lightning damage to surrounding enemies. This is kind of neat. I'm not a super big fan of Lucky Hit right now. We'll see if this ends up being pretty good. Masochist makes it so that critical strikes with shape-shifting skills also heal you for 3% of your maximum life, which I think has the potential to be huge if you're focusing on a shape-shifting build. Just any sort of healing, I think, is potentially quite powerful. Calm Before the Storm makes it so that you have a lucky hit where nature magic skills have up to a 15% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. Reducing cooldowns of ultimates is always kind of a good thing. Even though this is a lucky hit, it kind of applies to all your nature magic skills. So potentially something like Tornado or something could be a really good synergistic skill here. Next up, for the Wolf section, we have Pack Leader, which gives you Lucky Hit. Critical strikes have a 20% chance to reset the cooldown of your companion skills. Energize gives you lucky hit. Dealing damage has up to a 15% chance to restore 10 spirit. Bolster, fortify for 10% of your maximum life whenever you use a defensive skill. Kind of nice. And then Calamity, which extends the duration of your ultimate skills by 25%. All of these are pretty cool. I think that things like Calamity or Bolster are probably the best here, but we'll have to see how good or bad Lucky Hit ends up being in the game. Next up, let's talk about the actual basic skills. There are 5 of these, although I do think that one of these is particularly maybe a little bit stronger than the others. We'll go through all of them. So we have Earth Spike. This basically appears to have a cooldown, perhaps, for a basic skill, which is somewhat strange, but it does generate spirit, and what it does is it sunders the earth and it pales the first enemy hit for a little bit of damage. The options after that make it so it has a chance to stun for a short time, and it can fortify you for a percentage of your basic life whenever Earth Spike damages enemies who are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And you also have a chance to summon a second Earth Spike when you hit an immobilized or stunned enemy. So as you can see, there's always a lot of crowd control, hitting kind of stuff going on for Druid that is pretty popular here. This is kind of a weird skill. If it actually has a cooldown, this will be the first basic attack that I've seen that has a cooldown. It also has some interesting things like having the ability to fortify right away or crowd control enemies. So kind of neat. Wind Shear, you conjure a piercing blade of wind and you deal a little bit of damage. It generates spirit and has a 33% lucky hit chance. The Wind Shear first node makes it so that you have a 35% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, which I think is pretty good. Generally, adding vulnerability to a basic skill is a good thing. And then each enemy hit by Wind Shear increases your movement speed by 5% for 3 seconds, up to 20%. And this node tells us a little bit about Wind Shear in that it's not like a single target air burst, but it's probably more of like an air blade that swoops out and can hit multiple enemies. This last node here makes it so that Wind Shear grants additional spirit for each enemy hit beyond the first, which kind of confirms what we just learned from the other node. Next up, we have Storm Strike, which I think is arguably maybe a little bit overtuned just at first glance. Electricity gathers around your weapon, dealing 28.35 damage to your target, and then it chains up to a whole bunch of enemies, and it deals less damage each time it chains. And the really strong part is that you gain 25% damage reduction for 3 seconds after dealing damage with Storm Strike. That's powerful. Definitely a powerful generator with damage reduction built right into it, the ability to chain to other enemies. We've kind of seen how Chain Lightning is pretty strong for Sorceress leveling up, and so this is definitely a good option. Storm Strike also has a chance then from this first node to immobilize all enemies hit, which I'm assuming also counts those that are chained. Since we have a lot of things that benefit from immobilized enemies, this is pretty nice. It also has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds, which is pretty good. And then it can chain up to additional enemies. Storm Strike looking very, very strong. Probably be one of the first things I check out in the beta with the Druid. Next, we have the 2 shape-shifting basic skills. I'm assuming that using these will shapeshift you into a werewolf and allow you to stay into that mode until you use another skill. And so Claw generates 9 spirits, you shapeshift into a werewolf, and you claw at the enemy for some damage. The first node makes it so it attacks faster by 10%. Then you can choose between having it have 10% chance to attack twice, or having it so that your claw applies a poison damage over 3 seconds. You'll notice that werewolf has a lot of like poison options in its build, and this could potentially be good with some sort of poison synergy going on. For the werebear version, you're going to maul enemies in front of you, which kind of implies that this is somewhat of an AoE hitting skill, and it generates 11 spirit. The first node makes it so that if the enemy is hit by a maul, then you fortify for a percentage of your base life. This is pretty good because being able to consistently and constantly regenerate your fortify value will definitely make you a tankier druid for sure. The first node up here increases the range and radius of maul, and the other option makes it so that Maul has a chance to knock down enemies for 2 seconds, which is, pretty useful. Next, we move into the spirit skills, and there's a whole bunch of different skills and some passive skills. Starting off on the left here, we have Tornado, where you conjure a swirling tornado that deals 105% damage. Whether or not this tornado runs around crazy like, or if it's kind of stands still, we're not really sure yet. But as you can see here, each time you cast Tornado, you have a 20% chance to spawn an additional tornado, which this node basically then acts like almost doubling your damage on that 20%. So it's like a 20% more damage option. The first option here is that enemies hit with Tornado have a 5% chance to become vulnerable for 3 seconds, which I think is kind of a low percent, unless this ticks very quickly. And then Primal Tornado makes it so that enemies that are damaged by it are slowed for 3 seconds, and that stacks up. So we don't actually know how much this is. Could be like 24%, could be higher than that, but slowing enemies inside of your damage dealing skills is pretty good. Next up, we have Lightning Storm. Basically you conjure a growing lightning storm that deals damage per strike and increases the number of strikes the longer it's channeled, up to a maximum of 5. And so it kind of seems like this is a channeled skill. Maybe you could just tap it and activate it and go, but I'm not sure how I feel about this. Generally, channeled skills are significantly weaker just from the standpoint of you have to stand. If you're standing still, you tend to be dead in a lot of ARPGs. So I don't know if I like this one right off the bat. The size of your lightning storm can be preserved for 4 seconds after channeling if you take the first node. And the first option node makes it so that lightning storm has a 8% chance to immobilize enemies for 3 hits. And then lightning storm gains an additional lightning strike, which I think means that you could channel it for longer. But I'm not really sure how this works exactly. We'll have to try it out in the beta. Next, we have some passives here that affect your spirit. We have Heart of the Wild, which can increase your maximum spirit by up to 9. Abundance makes it so that your basic skills generate up to 15% more spirit with 3 points invested. And then Wild Impulses, your core skills cost 5% more spirit, but deal 10% increased damage. This is actually a pretty decent little passive here, because most of the time if you're investing points into like Tornado, for example, each point that you spend on the core skill will increase it by a increasing 10% damage, which means that if there's any node like this that doesn't do like at least 10%, it's probably better just to spend a point on the particular skill. And so at least this is somewhat equal to that, and it does hit every single core skill. So if you're going to be using multiple of these core skills, that can be pretty good. Next up, we have Landslide. So this is an earth skill that crushes enemies between 2 pillars of earth, dealing up to 78% damage. And then the first node here makes it so that after it damages enemies X number of times, the next hit will immobilize enemies. The first optional one is when you immobilize or stun an enemy, you gain a terror mote. Enemies hit by Landslide consume a terror mote, causing it to guaranteed crit with 10% more critical strike damage. Bosses always have a 30% chance to grant a terror mote when hit, so I think that this could potentially be a pretty good skill both for clearing and for dealing with bosses. Also, when you strike an immobilized or stunned enemy with Landslide, an additional pillar is formed. So if you have like some other way of consistently immobilizing or stunning enemies, this could potentially increase the amount of damage you're doing with Landslide by 50%, which is pretty decent. This next passive area makes it so that your critical strike chance to go against close enemies is increased, which is probably good for your transformation, shape-shifting skills. And then we have Digigrade Gate. You gain 4% movement speed while in werewolf form, and this bonus persists after you leave werewolf form, which I think this looks pretty good, especially for like early leveling. I don't think we get a movement skill in this particular class until very late, and so this could potentially speed up your character. Iron Fur make it so that you have damage reduction while in werebear form, and this bonus also persists for 3 seconds after you leave the form. So these are kind of like the light version of the capstone at the bottom. Shred is a werewolf skill where you perform a trio of combo attacks. The first attack deals damage, the second one does damage, and then the third one is a larger finishing move that deals probably more damage, would be my guess. I'm not really sure how this works per se, if you can like press the button 3 times, or you're holding it down, or what exactly is going on here. Looking forward to testing this out on the beta as well. Enhanced Shred makes it so that Shred gains attack speed and heals you for 2% of your maximum life as an enemy is struck. Healing for 2% of your life is pretty good. I definitely like that for sure, especially if that means a single use can heal you for 6%. That would be nice. First option makes it so that Shred's third combo attack is larger and applies additional poison damage over X number of seconds, or you can choose that Shred's second and third attacks also perform a dash. In addition, Shred's critical strike chance or critical strike damage is increased by an amount. If this kind of like makes you dash around a lot more and so you can like clear a little bit better, this could be pretty cool for sure. Next, we have the Bear skill, which is Pulverize. You shapeshift into a werebear and slam the ground, dealing damage to surrounding enemies. The first thing makes it so that the next Pulverize will overpower every unknown amount of seconds when you remain healthy. This could potentially be pretty good, especially if you are, running from pack to pack, and this is like a relatively short thing, means that you can start off with an overpowered Pulverize and do some really big damage. That could be pretty cool. And also means that if you start off this as your first skill you use against a boss, it's probably going to overpower. The first optional thing makes it so that enemies are stunned for some time when you overpower with Pulverize. So once again, this makes it a really strong option for opening up on a pack just by stunning everything with your Pulverize. That's pretty cool. And then your other option is that enemies hit with Pulverize deal less damage, 15% less damage for 4 seconds. This is like a defensive option, kind of like for being more tanky. Moving down next to the defensive tree, there's a couple of pretty cool options in here. We have Earthen Barrier, which basically is a rock shield that lasts for 3 seconds, and it grants you a barrier that absorbs up to 10% of your base life and damage. This thing lasts for 3 seconds and it has a 16-second cooldown, which could potentially be pretty decent. The first node makes it so that you are unstoppable while this is active, so kind of like a CC break probably. And then Rock Shrapnel flies outward when Earthen Bulwark is destroyed or expires and deals 300% damage to surrounding enemies. And this damage is increased by barrier bonuses. So I could really see this doing a lot of work in like some sort of melee build, enemies coming up and hitting you, and it just explodes in like kind of almost a thorn style damage. The other option is that casting Earthen Bulwark grants you 7% base life as Fortify, which is pretty decent. Stacking up Fortify quickly will help you be more tanky, but it's like overall. Next, we have Cyclone Armor. This is pretty neat because it has a passive effect. So if you aren't even really filling out all your skill bar yet, just slapping this on will be kind of nice. It gives you 20% non-physical damage reduction, and then the active skill makes it so that the winds rapidly expand and knock back enemies dealing damage. There's a lot of nodes that deal more damage or do special types of damage when things are knocked back, so this could be pretty good and has a cooldown of 15 seconds. Next, we have enemies who are knocked back by the Cyclone Armor are also slowed, so that's another good source of getting some sort of crowd control on the enemy. And then Persevering Cyclone Armor. Every 10 seconds, the Cyclone Armor intensifies, causing incoming damage to grant you 40% damage reduction for unknown amount of seconds. This seems very strong. You start off going right into a boss fight, the boss hits you for the very first time, and you're going to be taking 40% less damage for an unknown amount of time. That seems pretty good. If this is like even like 2 or 3 seconds, that could potentially be like life-saving amount of, damage reduction, especially because you might not have your Fortify up yet. Innate Cyclone Armor makes it so that enemies that are knocked back by Cyclone Armor become vulnerable for a little bit, which is pretty cool. A guaranteed vulnerability on 15-second cooldown. Pretty decent. Next, we have Blood Howl, where you shapeshift into a werewolf and howl furiously, and you heal for 20% of your maximum life. That is a lot of life. I'm assuming that this also scales up with levels, which will be pretty cool. I'm not sure how much it scales up with levels, but If it's shorter cooldown or healing more, I think both of those are pretty good. The first thing makes it so that kills reduce the cooldown of Blood Howl by 1 second. So you could be howling a lot and healing a ton. It also gives you increased attack speed for 4 seconds. So if you could somehow kind of keep this rolling, that could be really, really powerful. And then it also generates spirit. So with generating spirit, making a shorter cooldown, this could potentially kind of become like a spammable super heal engine option, which I think could be pretty cool. Next up, we have Debilitating Roar. This is your werebear skill for the section, and you shapeshift into a werebear, you bellow a mighty roar, and you reduce nearby enemies' damage dealt by 50% for 4 seconds. This is very similar to a barbarian skill, except for as opposed to you taking less damage, this makes it so that enemies around you do less damage. So this is pretty good for like teamwork and team play. Next here, Debilitating Roar also fortifies you for 8.8% of your base life. And then your first option is Debilitating Roar also slows enemies for 4% or 40% for its duration. So 40% slow for 4 seconds. That's kind of nice. And then Debilitating Roar also heals you for 4% of your maximum life for those 4 seconds each second. So that's a 16% heal here just from this. And if you can find some way to extend the duration or lower the cooldown of this, it could be a pretty decent way to stay healthy. Next, we have Ancestral Fortitude passive. This just increases your non-physical resistances by an amount. And then this next one, Vigilance, you gain unknown amount of damage reduction for unknown amount of seconds after using a defensive skill. This could potentially be really powerful because I could totally see several of these skills being on your bar because they're just very, very good. Like Cyclone Armor almost just feels free. Earthen Bulwark seems pretty cool. Blood Howl feels amazing. Even Debilitating Roar has a lot of good options. All of these skills seem pretty good. Next up, we have the Companion section, which I know a lot of people are excited about. We have Wolves. You summon out 2 wolves, and I believe that this is just passive, so they're like just putting this on the bar, the wolves appear. You don't have to deal with or manage with summoning them or probably even keeping them alive, which is pretty nice. You can press the button to direct your wolves to focus fire on a single target, which is pretty nice and has a 14-second cooldown. The first node here makes it so that wolves deal 20% increased damage to immobilized, stunned, slowed, or poisoned enemies. So we've already seen lots of different ways to do that further up in the kit. And then when you critically strike, your wolves gain attack speed for some time, which is kind of neat. Or you can do Lucky Hit. Your wolves' attacks have a chance to fortify you for a little bit of life. This could potentially be pretty good because, you know, the wolves themselves have a 50% Lucky Hit chance. I'm not really sure what the chance of this node is going to be, but this could be just provide a way to very passively provide Fortify without you having to have it on other skills. Next, we have Call of the Wild. Your companions deal 8% bonus damage. This node's definitely not as good as just investing into your individual companion unless you plan on running more than one companion. Speaking of the other companions, we have Ravens. Ravens, if you put it on the bar, you have a number of ravens that fly above you, and they'll periodically come down and peck enemies for a little bit of damage. That's 89% every 6 seconds is actually a decent amount. That's almost like a core skill. The active basically makes it so that target area is swarmed with ravens, and it deals a certain amount of damage over some time. And this has a 25-second cooldown, and overall seems pretty good. Like, it does quite a bit of damage, and has the ability to kind of like have like some area denial or area control. The first node makes it so that you have increased critical strike chance for 5 seconds against enemies hit by ravens. So for bosses, they're coming down every 6 seconds. They peck the box. They peck the boss for every 6 seconds, and for the 5 seconds after that, you have big critical strike buff. So that's not bad at all, and definitely not bad. The first option makes it so that 2 additional ravens periodically attack enemies. I don't know if that means that you're going to attack quicker or do more damage, but we'll have to see. The other option makes it so that enemies inside the swarm of ravens, when it is activated, become vulnerable for 3 seconds. The cooldown on this is about 25 seconds, so that's kind of a long cooldown for vulnerability, but could potentially be good. Clarity makes it so that when you shift into human form, you gain more spirit. So if you're going on like using werebear skills and then you storm strike, you get extra spirit when you go and do that. That's kind of cool. And then the last companion that you can have is the Vine Creeper. This is basically a creepy vine that periodically emerges from the ground every 7 seconds and applies poisoning damage over 6 seconds to an enemy in the area. And the active skill makes it so it strangles all surrounding enemies, immobilizing them for 2 seconds and poisoning them over time. This has a 20-second cooldown, and it kind of seems okay. Kind of like we'll just poke random enemies near you and give you the ability to immobilize them. As we said, immobilization and other crowd control effects are pretty powerful on a Druid. Vine Creeper Immobilize will last an additional second is the first node, and the first optional node is critical strike chances increased by 20% enemies, 20% against enemies that are strangled by the Vine Creeper. I'm assuming that means the active part of this, so every 20 seconds you can get like 3 seconds basically of immobilization, which has extra crit. Now, if this is just from the passive effect, that could be probably even better than that, but we'll have to see. It would kind of also line up with the Raven's node of adding crit, whereas, you know, the Vine Creeper hits every 7 seconds, and it lasts for 6 seconds. This would kind of be very similar to that. The Ferocious Vine Creeper, its active poisoning duration is increased by 3 seconds, so you could basically keep that poison up non-stop. And I'm not sure if that would like stack the damage up or something, but it does seem kind of cool. Nature's Reach, you deal 3% increased damage to distant enemies, and you double this bonus if they are also slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So this is just a generic damage multiplier against things that are both distant, and then it doubles if they are crowd controlled by some common crowd controls. And this is definitely not bad. If you're really focusing on one skill though, you probably want to take this after you've leveled that skill to level 5. Next up, we have the Wrath part of the tree. There's really a lot that's going on here, so we'll start up here. This is kind of like the elemental section. Your storm skills have a lucky hit 20% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 1 second. The charged atmosphere makes it so that every 18 seconds, a lightning strike hits a nearby enemy for 47%. So this is kind of just like having a free companion that's zapping out of your body as a lightning strike. That's kind of neat. The electric shock makes it so that you have a lucky hit. Dealing lightning damage to enemies has a 5% chance to immobilize them. And if they're already immobilized, the lightning damage is increased instead, which is potentially kind of neat. Bad Omen is a lucky hit 10%. When dealing damage to a vulnerable, immobilized, or stunned enemy, that lightning strike also hits dealing 57.25. So this is like a 10% chance on a lucky hit that when you're hitting crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies that you deal extra damage, which could potentially be pretty powerful, but lucky hit is kind of not all that great in the first place. Lastly, we have Endless Tempest, which increases the duration of Hurricane and Cataclysm. Hurricane's the next skill we're going to talk about, and Cataclysm is one of your ultimate abilities. Hurricane is a 20-second cooldown. It forms a hurricane around you that deals 102% damage to surrounding enemies for 8 seconds. So if you get enough cooldown into the build, maybe it's possible to keep this up full time, as you can increase the duration by like 15%. So maybe if you had like 10 seconds worth of cooldown, this could be up all the time. Enemies that are hit by Hurricane are also slowed by 25% for 2 seconds. And then the first option makes it so that Hurricane has a 15% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. And the other option is that enemies affected by Hurricane deal less damage. So this could potentially be like a Blade Vortex type of thing that makes enemies do less damage to you. Kind of like maybe something that's good for tanks. Boulder basically is you unearth a large rolling boulder that just knocks back enemies and crushes them, dealing damage with each hit. So you're basically just bowling out a giant bowling ball. It has a 20-second cooldown, which is still also pretty big. The first node here makes it so that when Boulder reaches the end of its path, enemies hit are slowed by 30% for 2 seconds. If Boulder is overpowered, enemies are stunned instead. So if you have a consistent way to overpower, this could potentially be very, very strong. And then if you have any Fortify, Boulder has 75% increased critical strike chance. I'm kind of wondering if this node is correct, because if they didn't forget a period there, like 7.5. This is insanely strong. You're basically going to be critting with your bolter 3/4 of the time, because getting fortify is generally kind of easy and something you kind of want to get to make yourself tanky. So this could potentially be very, very strong. Bolter's critical strike chance is also increased by 3% each time it deals damage. I honestly don't know why you would take this particular node over the guaranteed crit, but maybe it's good. I don't know. The next thing here is Earth skills deal increased damage to those that are slowed, stunned, mobilized, or knocked back. Bolter knocks enemies back as it rolls, maybe hitting them multiple times. Actually, now that I think about it, that could be kind of cool. Safeguard critical strike with Earth skills fortify you for percentage of your life. Wait, so you're telling me that crit strikes with Earth skills fortify me, and then Bolter has a node where if I have any fortify, I have 75% increased critical strike? Yeah, that seems pretty strong. Stone Guard, when you have fortify for over 50% of your maximum life, your Earth skills deal increased damage. As you can see, there's lots of synergy here. This is pretty cool. I definitely like the idea of this. Even though it's just 4% increased damage, this is like just generic everything. It's not really conditional, as you're going to want to be above. You're probably going to be at 100% fortify as much as you can. This next skill, Rabies, I think is actually really cool. You shift into a werewolf form and perform an infectious bite on the target, dealing damage, and it applies an additional 55% poisoning damage over 6 seconds. Infected enemies spread rabies to surrounding targets. This has a 12-second cooldown, but if you can like bite one enemy and it like quickly spreads out this poison damage, that can be pretty neat. I also don't know if enemies can keep passing rabies back to each other. Like if I bite the first one, it spreads it to the second one. This one, the poison falls off, but this one's still rabid. Does it make it rabid again? Who knows, man? Does sound pretty cool. The enhanced rabies makes it so that rabies poisoning damage also increases over the lifetime of the disease, dealing bonus damage at max duration. This isn't really all that great, but doing more damage over time, could be cool. Savage Rabies makes it so that rabies deals its total poisoning damage in X number of seconds instead of X. Not sure if this is going to make it shorter or longer. I would guess just by the name that would be shorter, so maybe like 3 seconds instead of 6. Could be kind of cool, especially combined with enhanced rabies, if it actually stacks up well. The other option is that natural rabies spreads 10% faster. Depending on the spread speed, this could be pretty powerful. Next little passive area is that poison enemies are slowed by 8%. Just being able to spread a slow with poison very easily with just 2 points could be very powerful indeed. Envenom makes it so that poison enemies take additional critical strike damage. And then Toxic Claws make it so that critical strikes with werewolf skills deal 8% of their base damage as poisoning over 4 seconds. So there's a lot of synergy going on here as well. Some really, really cool nodes that could potentially, lead into some sort of poison build. Next, we have Trample. This is basically our one movement skill on the Druid. It has a 14-second cooldown. You shapeshift into a werebear. You become unstoppable and you charge forward and you deal 26% damage and you knock back enemies. Enemies who are knocked back into terrain take an additional amount of damage, 47%, and they're stunned for 3 seconds. Since there's a lot of things that take benefit from you either hitting knocked back or stunned enemies, and having a movement skill is always nice, I can see this being a popular pick. The first node makes it so that Trample deals bonus damage, and this bonus is reduced for each enemy that's hit after the first. Casting Trample grants 6% base life as Fortify, so once again, another easy, cheap way to get Fortify in the build, and the other option makes it so that Trample gives you 20 Spirit. This actually, I feel like, it's going to be somewhat of a hard choice. Probably getting Spirit will be a better choice than getting Fortify if it's easy to get Fortify, but this becomes a very powerful 14-second movement skill. Lastly, we have Mending. Well, while you're in werebear form, you receive 5% additional healing from all sources. This is kind of cool. And then the other one is that when you remain in werebear form for at least 30 seconds, your next skill will overpower. I'm assuming that putting points into this will lower it down, but like, I'm not really a big fan of the you have to be doing X for like such a long period of time. 30 seconds, especially for just an overpower skill, feels very low power. Next up, we have the ultimate skills. And so there is basically one ultimate for each type of skill. We'll start off with Cataclysm. Cataclysm, a massive storm follows you for 8 seconds. This has a 80-second cooldown. Tornadoes knock back enemies. Lightning strikes wildly, dealing 54.6% damage. This seems kind of interesting. It has a pretty high lucky hit chance at 82%. And then Prime Cataclysm makes it so that it lasts 10 seconds instead of 8 seconds. And then the last note here makes it so that lightning strikes from Cataclysm make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. So this becomes a way that you could apply vulnerability as well. And then this other node up here, if you remember, has the ability to increase the duration of Cataclysm, probably by another like 1.5 seconds if you max it all the way out. So it'd be like 11.5 seconds, which honestly seems kind of short. Defiance here makes it so that nature magic skills deal increased damage to elites. It's pretty conditional and not a huge number. Circle of Life, nature magic skills that consume spirit heal you for 1% of your maximum life. This is pretty good. Nice little sustain if you're not getting sustain elsewhere. Pretty nice. I wish Barbarian has more stuff like this. Natural Disaster, your earth skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and your storm skills do increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, and knockback. This really is quite conditional as well, and not very high numbers. Kind of sad to see in like the ultimate section. Resonance here makes it so that nature magic skills deal 2% increased damage, and you triple this bonus if an earth skill is the next skill cast after a storm skill, or a storm skill is the next skill cast after an earth skill. So some conditionalness to get like 6% damage probably. This probably scales up to, I guess, 18% damage with 3 points. It doesn't seem all that great, but you know, probably if you have extra points, you're going to pick this up. Next, we have the Earth skill ultimate, Petrify. You encase all nearby enemies in stones, stunning them for 3 seconds. You'll deal 25% increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by Petrify. Now, against bosses, the critical strike damage is increased by some amount, and its duration is increased to unknown amount of seconds. I'd guess like 6 seconds maybe. I'd also assume that you're just applying a Petrify debuff on them. You're not actually going to be stunning the boss for 6 seconds, because that could be pretty broken. Or it just like applies a gigantic stagger amount. Next, the Petrify's effect duration is increased by 1 second, so that probably isn't multiplied by, you know, boss values. So it only just gives you 1 more. But then killing an enemy affected by Petrify grants 25 spirit, which could be, you know, pretty nice little bonus for sure. Next, this passive area increases the amount of Fortify you gain from all sources. When you are stunned, immobilized, or knocked down, you get Fortify. And you get, this other one is 5% chance when struck to fortify yourself for 1.76% base life. That's a little bit chance, but, you know, kind of nice as well. And then Unrestrained makes it so that you reduce the duration of crowd control impairing effects on you by 3%. And you triple this effect while you have Fortify for over 20% of your maximum life. So since there's 3 points here, you'll probably be able to scale this up to 9, triple that. That's 27% crowd control duration impairment reduction. I'm not sure what the terminology is going to be there, but that's quite a bit of reduction for your character. Next, I think this is the Werebear Ultimate, Grizzly Rage. It has a 60-second cooldown, and you shift into a dire Werebear for 10 seconds. Gaining 20% damage bonus and 20% damage reduction. And the damage bonus is increased by 3% for each second while you're in the form. So at the very end, you're going to be, you know, stack that up quite a bit, because kills extend the duration by up to 1 second to a total of 10 seconds. So you could be in a Werebear, the dire Werebear form for 20 seconds. At the end of the 20 seconds, you'd have 60% increased damage, which is pretty cool. The next node makes it so that you're unstoppable while using this ultimate, which is good. And then the last one makes it so that you gain base life as Fortify every second that Grizzly Rage is active, And so if you can stay in there for the full 20 seconds, that's just 60% life of Fortify, which is very powerful. The first passive here for the shape-shifting skills makes it so that shape-shifting skills that transform you into a different form, it deals 5% increased damage. This is okay. It's very conditional and not a huge amount. Natural Fortitude, shape-shifting fortifies you for an amount. This is pretty good. If you're, shifting between different skills, getting just free Fortify is definitely nice. And then Heightened Senses, upon shapeshifting into a werewolf or werebear form, you gain 4% damage reduction against elites for 3 seconds. And so this is just stuff that's like all helping you if you're like power shifting between werebear and werewolf, up to like a 12% damage reduction against elites. Definitely isn't that bad. Lastly, we have the werewolf ultimate skill, which you shapeshift in a werewolf. You become immune and quickly dash 10 times between enemies in the area for up to 420 damage. Now, the immune key text here is pretty interesting because immune means you take no damage and you cannot be crowd controlled. And other skills that have immune can be used while you're crowd controlled. So this could potentially be a very powerful CC break where you just dash around and murder everything. The first node here makes it so that each time Lacerate deals a crit, you heal for 3% of your life. And the last node makes it so that the initial strike is a guaranteed crit and does 200% increased damage. Pretty good. And so, yeah, that is all of the different skill nodes that we know of so far. And you can kind of see that there's a lot of like synergy in some of the builds, but let's go over the legendary powers that we know of right now. Now we have the Codex stuff over here, but we also in the database part here can go and see the actual Druid legendaries. There are 41 of these, where there are only 20 that are actually on the Codex of power. So you definitely want to make sure that you are, looking at all of these. Now these will only be available, some of them. The ones that aren't on the Codex, you have to find an item and then either use that item or pull the aspect off and put it onto an item, which is a one-time thing. Once you put a aspect onto an item, you can't remove it. So yeah, we'll see. So the very first one makes it so that storm skills deal increased critical strike damage against invulnerable or immobilized enemies, which is kind of good. Your earth skills deal increased damage to enemies afflicted by any crowd control. This is also pretty good, doing more damage to things that are like even slowed or taunted. That's pretty good. While in werebear form, you deal increased damage up to some unknown amount for every unknown amount of difference in the current life percentage between you and the enemy. So I think what this means is that if you stay healthy at like 100% health, as the enemy gets more and more and more hurt, you're going to do more and more damage, kind of like a ramping execute style passive here. And this is just passive, so this is something that is kind of nice. The next one is critical strikes with werewolf skills restore some amount of spirit, probably like 2 or something, but restoring spirit with crits is always a good thing, especially if werewolf ends up going very high crit. Next, we have, while there are X number of or more poisoned enemies nearby, I'm not sure what nearby means, but you deal increased damage. So for like a rabies build, this could be pretty cool. After shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced for some amount of seconds, up to a certain percentage. This is kind of cool because if you're shapeshifting back and forth between werebear and werewolf, this could just acts as a flat cost reduction, especially as you spam. And since you can shapeshift with your basic skill, this can kind of help you keep this buff up nonstop. The next one is a lucky hit thing that makes it so that nature magic skills have up to some percentage to entangle the enemy with vines, which immobilizes them for a little bit of time, and it poisons them for some time as well. So the ability to kind of just randomly immobilize enemies could be kind of useful, although it is lucky hit. So we'll have to see how much lucky hit that is. Next one is after spending unknown amount of spirit, you deal increased damage for some time, which if you can keep this buff up, just any sort of flat damage buff is kind of nice. The next one here, not really sure what some of these are. There appears to be like critical damage earth, which I guess that you do more critical damage with earth skills. I actually haven't seen these ones here that are just kind of basic and generic, and I guess that maybe these haven't been implemented yet in the actual system. Next, let's go, and I believe that there are a few legendaries that weren't on here then. Oh, I actually was very dumb and I was reading the Paragon power nodes. Sorry about that. These are the Paragon nodes that we can have in the end Paragon board. These are actually the legendary affixes. I was kind of wondering why they were slightly different than I was remembering. So, very first one, Lightning Storm, Critical Strike spawn. Some amount of dancing bolts that seek out enemies in the area, dealing flat lightning damage. The next one is that Grizzly Rage now shapeshifts you into a dire werewolf as opposed to a dire werebear. As a dire werewolf, you gain movement speed instead of damage reduction, and you get a spirit cost reduction. Whether or not you still get that increased damage buildup is unknown. In addition, kills heal you for some amount of your HP, which is kind of neat. The next one is that gain one additional companion. In addition, your companion skills deal bonus damage. So it's kind of like adding +1 Hydra, but instead you're able to summon like 3 wolves as opposed to just 2. Next we have Boulder is now a core skill and costs, I believe it's 10 spirit here, and to cast, and it deals some percentage of its total normal damage, probably somewhere between 80 and 100%. So this is kind of neat. I wonder if this removes the cooldown reduction or the cooldown of 10 seconds on it. And it'll be kind of interesting to see how that works together with the Nature's Fury, where you have a chance to trigger a storm skill if you cast an earth skill from the same category. Will this make it so that if you cast Boulder and proc that, it'll summon like, Hurricane, or will it summon out something from the core skill section like Tornado or Lightning Storm instead? Next we have Wall Dashing. Shred seeks out nearby poison enemies, dealing damage instantly of the poison damage that's already been affected to them, which is kind of neat. Shred does have that dashing aspect to it. We also have after killing an enemy with Shred, your next werewolf skill generates more spirit and deals increased damage. Next up, we have when we're struck as a werebear, you have a random chance to gain some amount of spirit. Next, we have Lucky Hit. Wind Shear has up to some amount to fully restore your spirit. And as we remember, Wind Shear is kind of like that Wind Blade skill, so you can potentially hit multiple different enemies and have a chance here to fill up your spirit very, very quickly. Next, we have Hurricane damage is increased by some amount each second it's active. So it does normally last about like 8 seconds. Maybe if you can keep this ramping, the Hurricane just goes truly insane. And that would be pretty cool. Next up, we have damage from earth skills slows enemy on hit for some amount of seconds. So having earth skills automatically apply crowd control is a powerful thing. Next up, earth skills deal more critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies. Next up, we have the duration of Earthen Bulwark is increased by, I believe it's 3 seconds here. And then, in addition, killing an enemy with Earth skills replenish the amount of shield that you've gotten from Earth Bulwark. So this seems to be very, very powerful, increases the duration of Earthen Bulwark in the first place. I think it takes up to actually 6 seconds here. And then when you kill enemies with Earth skills, so like Boulder or something, you're going to basically replenish the shield and keep yourself healthy. Next, we have Lucky Hit, up to some amount of chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target, and then which causes direct damage. Deal with any direct damage you deal to them to pulse for additional damage to surrounding enemies. I could see this actually being very powerful, even though it's a Lucky Hit thing, so that when you deal lightning damage, you basically have a chance to turn them into a lightning rod. And so like if your tornado's ticking on them a whole bunch, or your companions are hitting them a whole bunch, they're like sparking off and doing tons of damage to their allies. Next up, we have casting a storm skill grants your earth skills more critical strike damage for some time. Casting an earth skill gives critical strike chance to storm skills. And so it's kind of like a synergy of going back and forth between the two different types of skills. Next, we have damaging a poison enemy with werebear skills. Instantly consumes the poison damage and does it, I'm guessing, and it gets rid of the poisoning. So potentially you could like spread rabies, smack with werebear skill, do a bunch of damage. Rabies spreads back, keep smacking to do more damage. Could be kind of cool. Next, when you use a shapeshifting skill that changes your form, you gain flat life. When you're at full life, you gain the same amount as Fortify. This seems busted OP, very strong. Almost something that you would want maybe on any build, especially because if you just have any of the generators or any skill, like your movement skill even, that changes your form, gaining life or gaining Fortify, very, very strong. Next up, Earth Spikes. Earth Spike launches spikes in a line and has a unknown amount of cooldown here, maybe like a 10-second cooldown, maybe 2.5 seconds. Next, Trample now summons Pillars of Earth, so landslides Pillars of Earth during its duration that deal extra normal damage. So Trample's your movement skill, landslides is the thing that summons up pillars that like hit enemies. And so if you can basically trample through enemies landsliding behind you, that's kind of cool. Trample is also now a nature magic and earth skill. So this does help it so that Trample will get affected by earth magic skills or earth magic bonuses. Next, we have critical strikes with Shred deal some amount of the damage as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. So it's kind of like spreads the shred. Next, increases to your maximum spirit, or increase your maximum spirit to some amount and spirit generation by some amount while Grizzly Rage is active. So helps you just like do more when you're Grizzly Raging. Next, in Cyclone Armor provides physical damage reduction. So normally it provides just 20% non-physical damage reduction. Now this makes it also provide the same amount of physical damage reduction. In addition, Cyclone Armor will be applied to all nearby allies. This is very powerful for group play. Basically, if you just have this and have it on your bar, your entire team is taking just 20% less damage. Very, very good for team play, for support play. Next up, Landslide's Earth Pillars each strike a second time and deal additional bonus damage per hit. That's pretty cool, especially if you're combining it where you charge through enemies, leaving landslides behind you, and then those pillars hit a second time. That sounds like that's some pretty cool synergy. Next, this one is one I think that is really neat. Pulverize is now also an Earth skill. After casting some amount of Pulverize, tectonic spikes continue to deal damage over time. And so you turn Pulverize, which is a bear skill, into, I guess it is also an Earth skill. So it stays being a werebear skill, but now it's also an Earth skill that also does damage over time. And there are some things that are going to synergize with this as well. Your core skills now deal increased base damage based off of the amount of Fortify you have. So things like Pulverize, for example, will deal more damage the more fortified you are. This could be very strong, just generic damage boost. Pulverize now creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing a percentage of its damage to targets in its path. Okay, so Pulverize was this skill here in the Spirit section, which I believe these are normally called your core skills. So I'm wondering if they're going to be changing that there a little bit. And so you shapeshift into a werebear, slam the ground, dealing damage to surrounding enemies. Your next Pulverize will overpower when you are healthy for a certain amount of time. When enemies are stunned, or enemies are stunned for X amount of time when they're overpowered, or enemies hit with Pulverize do less damage. So now we can change that into Earth, have it leave spikes behind that continue to impact the enemy. Oh, and now it also creates a shockwave that travels forward. Okay, there's lots of stuff that affects Pulverize so far. Next up, your wolf companions are now werewolf companions. Werewolf companions deal some sort of additional damage and can spread rabies themselves. So I don't even know if you need to have rabies on your bar. If you have this, you can just have your 2 wolf companions munching on, spreading poison everywhere. And this could just be a really passive way to just walk through a dungeon. Your werewolf companions biting everybody and giving them rabies, and everything's just dying of poison around you. Could be very, very powerful. Next up, Bloodhowl increases critical strike chance by an amount. In addition, Bloodhowl now also affects nearby companions and players for some amount of seconds. If you recall, Bloodhowl is that defensive skill that heals you for 20% of your life, and it has a chance to give you 15% more attack speed for 4 seconds, or generates primary resource. I wonder if you can help your allies generate primary resource with this aspect, since it will affect them. Like, will it only generate spirit for you? Will it generate mana for sorks in your party, or fury for barbarians? I gotta know. Next, werewolf skills function as storm skills, and werebear skills function as earth skills for the Nature's Fury key passive. So this is pretty neat, because basically what this does is Nature's Fury have a 20% chance to trigger a opposite side skill when you use it. And so this basically makes it so that you're no longer just limited to doing earth or storm skills, but also werebear or werewolf skills to trigger stuff. Now, I don't know if it'll trigger off a storm skill or a earth skill, but like if it works one way, it could be like, hey, if I'm spamming pulverize, this is going to spawn tornadoes pretty consistently, because this is an earth skill technically, and then this is like your only actual storm skill I think that you could probably cast. So you could potentially just pulverize tornadoes out non-stop, which could be pretty cool. Next up, core skills deal additional damage for each active companion. That's just kind of neat, especially if you get crows in there, which gives you a lot of damage. You get damage reduction while shapeshift into werewolf. Debilitating Roar is now a werewolf skill. In addition, Debilitating Roar will immobilize poison enemies for some amount. So if you have your werewolf companions running around spreading rabies, you can now roar at them and they'll be immobilized. That's kind of cool. The duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by some seconds. In addition, critical strikes while Grizzly Rage is active increase your critical strike damage by some amount for the duration. So Grizzly Rage can already last like 20 seconds. That seems pretty strong. I don't know if this is actually over here. Yeah, aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast. The duration of Grizzly Rage increased by 1 second. In addition, critical strikes while Grizzly Rage is active increase your critical strike damage for 10% for the duration. So let's say you crit like once a second for 20 seconds. That's a lot of crit damage at the very end. You're absolutely wrecking enemies by the very end. Next, we have your companions gain the bonus of Bestial Rage key passive. So that key passive down here is basically either attack speed or increased damage when you shift, and you stay in that mode for a little bit. Next, when you have Fortify, your earth skills gain levels. And so this one here, Ballistic, is on the Codex as well. And so Ballistic aspect makes it so that when you're fortified, your earth skills gain 3 levels. Now there's a chance that this might be like 2 to 3 or something, but getting any fortified life gives you basically like over 30% more damage. That seems like a pretty good aspect indeed. Next up, when your Hurricane is active, you gain a certain amount of ranks to your shape-shifting skills. And so that's actually here, Storm Shifter's aspect. So it could be probably up to 3 ranks. So you can make your Pulverize an Earth skill. It's also a shape-shifting skill. So if you have Hurricane up and Ballistic aspect and Storm Shifter's aspect, we're already looking at 6 ranks potentially. That's quite a bit of damage. If you don't know, each rank basically gives you a stacking 10% damage. That's closer to like 77% damage, I believe. Next, Tornado will seek up to some number of random targets, maybe like 1 to 5 maybe. So having your tornadoes actually chase down enemies could be kind of cool. Next, critical strikes with storm skills charge the air around you for some time, causing lightning strikes to periodically hit an enemy in the area for lightning damage. This duration can be extended by additional critical strikes. It's kind of neat. Next, the Earth and Might key passive applies to your storm skills. And for me, this seems like it's going to be incredible strong. Super amazing. If you don't remember what Earth and Might does, Earth and Might, lucky hit chance so that when your Earth and now Storm skills have a 5% chance to restore all your spirit and cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 10 seconds. And this chance is increased by 10% for critical strikes or 100% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So if you have like Hurricane, for example, active, which has a lucky hit chance of 33%, and you're standing like next to a wall and you knock back enemies into the wall with your Cyclone armor, then you have a 33% chance per enemy that's being knocked back to trigger maximum spirit and all crits, let alone tornadoes going around and proccing this off the same. I think that this here, Mighty Storms, is going to be very, very cool. Next, when Nature's Fury key passive triggers a free skill, your next ultimate skill cooldowns of the opposite type are reduced by some amount. This, seems cool. Reducing the cooldown does seem neat. You gain some amount of bonus amount to your next Earthen Bulwark for each enemy you crowd control, up to a maximum of some unknown amount. So bumping up Earthen Bulwark seems strong. And those are the legendary aspects. Sorry for kind of going out of order there and doing the Paragon legendaries first and then the legendary aspects second. I just clicked on the wrong thing when I was prepping up the scene. But the legendary Paragon stuff is basically like what you find on the end game board things. Lastly, let's talk about the different uniques they have in the game already. Right now there are currently 8 uniques. And if you know what unique is, basically we have like our normal, the magic, the rare items, then we have legendary items, and then I believe above those we have like both uniques and sacred items, with uniques kind of just being like a special preset item that has preset stats, and I believe that you can only wear one of these at a time. So the first one here is a one-handed axe for Druid, and you gain stealth for some amount of time when you kill enemies with shred. Breaking stealth with an attack grants ambush, which guarantees critical strikes for the next few seconds. So even if this is 1 second, just guaranteeing crits after killing stuff is strong just for clearing packs or strong for killing bosses. Next up, Claw is now a storm skill and also casts Storm Strike at a percentage of normal damage. And this is a ludicrous staff that you can have. I think that this is going to be incredibly powerful because if you recall, Storm Strike is a skill that gives you 25% damage reduction. So if you can make it so that when you cast Claw, you also cast Storm Strike, well, now you're generating 24 spirit as opposed to just 9. And then Claw has a 10% chance to double swing. So you have a chance to be swinging with not 1 claw, but 2 claws and 2 Storm Strikes. Seem very, very, very strong. Next, we have a chest armor that makes it so that Werewolf is now your true form, and you gain some amount of ranks to all Werewolf skills. And then there is another chest armor that's just like that for Werebear. Now, I don't know how many this is going to be. It's definitely at least 2, but if it's like 4 total, we're already looking at like getting Werebear skills like Pulverize up to like level I don't even know, like 10 plus, maybe almost like 15. I'm not sure how much you can get on gear at this point, but this seems like a lot of levels that you can get on your gear. Next up is a helmet, lucky hit. Storm skills have a chance to grant some amount of spirit. Your base storm skills are now also werewolf skills. Okay, so getting benefit from using werewolf skills. I wonder if you turn into a werewolf when you cast these. That would be kind of cool. Next, your earth skills are now also werebear skills and fortify you for a flat amount. free fortify from a unique. Do you turn into a bear? Can you be a tornado bear or a hurricane bear? Sounds pretty cool. Next up is a pair of pants. Your wolf companions are infused with the power of the storm, dealing lightning damage and gaining the Storm Howl ability. So I wonder how this works. Like, can you have storm, rabies, werewolves? That could be kind of cool. Lastly, we have a unique ring. Gain a bonus when you kill with a shape-shifting skill. And so for werewolf, your next ultimate werebear, your next non-ultimate werebear skill costs no resources and has no cooldown. And then when it's in a werebear, your next werewolf skill will heal you for some amount of damage when damage is first dealt, or some amount of health you healed. And yeah, that seems pretty cool. This is definitely an item for shifting back and forth between two different forms. And yeah, that's the Druid. As you can see, very complicated class that has a lot of intricacies and weird things and cool uniques that are going to change the build, and even aspects that are going to make things crazy. We're not going to have access to the bottom part of the tree, so no capstone shenanigans, but I'm really looking forward to breaking Earth and Might when the game first comes out. I'm looking forward to playing a tanky bear or a scary werewolf or casting spells. This class has definitely gone from one that I wasn't very hyped about to definitely interested in seeing what the build variety is looking like. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Come by the stream. We'll be checking this out all weekend when the open beta starts. And yeah, thank you much.